What the naysayers don't understand is that this election has never been about me. It's about you. You have shown what history teaches us, that at defining moments like this one, the change we need doesn't come from Washington. Change comes to Washington. Change happens because the American people demand it, because they rise up and insist on new ideas and new leadership, a new politics for a new time. America, this is one of those moments.
Far fewer gray hairs on Barack Obama 4 years ago. Let's talk about his convention with our roundtable. George Will, Donna, Brazile, Matthew Dowd, joined by Dr. Kerry Healey, former Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts, now advisor to Mitt Romney, also former Obama advisor Bill Burton, now head of the Priorities USA Action Super PAC supporting him. And George Will, let's talk about President Obama. You heard all that hope 4 years ago. How does he calibrate the pitch this time around?
I think he runs at his opponents now. He's got the opponents he says he wants. He's presented himself as the first president in history ever to inherit from his predecessor an imperfect world, so he has this kind of comprehensive alibi. I think, judging by his campaign to date and his list of convention speakers, I think he's going to make 6 arguments for
a lot of
second term. Well, they're very quick. First is Mitt Romney's rich. Second, we need a serious vice president, Joe Biden instead of Paul Ryan. Third, Republicans hate women. Fourth, the only woman they don't hate is Ayn Rand, and she's dead and she wrote bad novels. Sixth, something must be done to prevent Sandra Fluke from paying for her own contraception. And all will be well, sixth and finally, all will be well if I can raise by 4.6 points the top income tax rate on fewer than 3% of the American people. That's it, so far as I can tell.
Is that it, Donna?
No. First of all, President Obama should not spend his speech refuting all of the arguments that the Republicans have made against him since day one. Secondly, he should not try to reinvent himself or reintroduce himself. I think the most important thing the president can do is talk to the American people, tell them about the journey we've been on as a country, the solutions that he has offered, the progress he's made, and to give us a glimpse into the next 4 years. If he can do that and give the American people a sense of pride in our accomplishments, not just his, because he had help in doing this, then I think the American people will rally to his cause and will put those posters back up on the wall.
But how about the question I posed to David Plouffe? Does he have to make some kind of a mirror image argument of what Mitt Romney was making the other night, where he talks to those disappointed supporters as well and says, listen, I know I didn't get everything right?
Oh, look, George, that's the elephant in the room. I mean, nobody wants to go out there and brag about, I'm doing a great job, when there are millions of Americans still unemployed. President Obama has to say, I feel your pain. I got your back. I'm working hard every day to get you back to work.
I think he has to do much more than just say he feels their pain. I mean, I think they're the same voters that Mitt Romney needs, obviously Barack Obama needs, and there are people that voted for him who were really enthusiastic about him, but now are leaning away from him and are disappointed in him, along with a lot of other Americans. I think he has to do something that conveys some modesty, some humility, and some humbleness, and some idea that maybe he doesn't say I made a mistake, but he comes really close to saying I've learned in office and I'm going to take responsibility for what's happened.
He's talked about the communications problems.
And that's like, when people say a communications problem, you're basically saying I didn't do anything wrong. I think we've had 2 presidents now in a row, Barack Obama and President George W. Bush, who seem to have an incredible incapacity to admit they made a mistake. And for the American public thinks it's a very powerful thing when you stand up and say I made a mistake, and it means you learned in office and you're taking responsibility. When you don't do that, the public sort of tunes their ears out and say this person will not take responsibility for what happened.
From discussions I've had with people inside your campaign, I think they agree with that. They think that some kind of a mea culpa would be a powerful move for the president.
Well, it was very clear from your conversation with David Plouffe that even he couldn't say that, in fact, the American people are better off than they were 4 years ago. So obviously there is a reticence to discuss the record. And as George was mentioning, it's quite likely that, unfortunately, the focus of the convention may be simply trying to denigrate or continue to say negative things about Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan, as opposed to actually explaining why They were unable to accomplish almost any of the goals laid out during the 2008
personally,
campaign.
you think, won't they zero in on the economic plans of Romney and Ryan?
Well, and we will have many robust discussions about that. We welcome that discussion because honestly, they don't have a record to run on. And when you have 50% of the young people coming out of college today with no jobs, when you have high unemployment still in place, I think that this is a discussion that's just going to have to be had after the convention.
I think there's no doubt that if the president were here right now, he would say that he wishes that more progress could have been made. And I think that when you get away from President Obama's speeches, I think that it takes on a life of rhetoric and loftiness and things like that. But when you actually listen to the words he says, if you listen to what he said yesterday in his campaign speech, you listen to the 2008 speech, he gets really down and dirty about what needs to get done and about the fact that we need to make more progress. I bet he does talk about why we didn't make more progress. And I bet he also does talk about the economic argument that Mitt Romney did not make on Thursday night. Because he didn't, the president's going to be able to fill in the blanks on what the consequences for the American people are for that kind of policy.
I think what the missing piece of this entire campaign on both sides of it, and the first one I think that does it is going to have an advantage in this race, is neither side has conveyed a compelling vision of the future. Right. Neither side has. What you saw, I think, and to a large degree at the Republican convention, was a vision of the past. The past was so great. Look at what the past was like. American was extraordinary. Families were like this. We can go back to the past by going to the future with Mitt Romney. That was theirs. Barack Obama, up to this point, which is why I think their convention, though it's going to be contrast and they need to have some about Mitt Romney, it has to be, if he's going to win, has to be primarily about what he's going to do in the next 4 years and what his vision of the future. If it goes back into this he said, she said thing, this race is going to stay tied.
It's also got to be why things will be different in the next 4 years.
The president's fundamental approach is backward looking. He talked in that clip we showed at the beginning of this segment about new ideas. The Democrats' idea is that programs 77 and 47 years old, Social Security and Medicare, don't need to change at all ever. The world has changed, our demography has changed, we can't end any of them as we know it. I think what Mr. Romney has to do is say that we have a fundamentally reactionary liberalism party. And we will change to suit a changed country.
But George, we've been talking about trickle-down economics for the last 30 years. And that's the reason why we're stuck in this economic situation that we're in. We face a balance sheet recession when you have the housing market and the financial market go under, and we're trying to come above that cloud storm. 29 consecutive months of job growth. 4.5 million jobs, a manufacturing sector that's getting stronger, the auto industry saved. I think this president has a remarkable record. Our troops home from Iraq, and while Mitt Romney didn't talk about our 70,000 men and women risking their lives in Afghanistan, President Obama will give their story as well. So I don't feel like I'm going into a convention on defense. We're going to play offense. We're going to take it to Mitt Romney. And if he wants to come back and tell us why we need to go back to Leave It to Beaver in the 1950s, fine. President Obama will go forward.
Leave it to Beaver?
I understand that President Obama didn't actually even see any of the convention, so his characterization of it being, almost in black and white, Leave It to Beaver terms is purely from what other people have told him. And if he had seen it, he would have seen a President Romney in the future, looking toward the future, looking toward energy independence, looking toward job creation, getting the engine of job creation going again, and knowing exactly how to do that thanks to his experience in the private sector.
In order to make the economic argument, President Obama is going to be calling out a big gun this week, Wednesday night, Bill Clinton. Here was the pitch he made 4 years ago.
Middle class and low income Americans are hurting, with incomes declining, job losses, poverty and inequality rising. The job of the next president is to rebuild the American dream. Barack Obama is the man for this job.
Bill Burton, it's no secret the two presidents haven't had the closest of relationships, but I think it shows how much at this point President Obama wants to win. He's not only calling in Bill Clinton for the big speech on Wednesday night, also using him in so many of his ads.
Well, President Clinton is a uniquely qualified surrogate for the president on the economy. And he takes this conversation from the theoretical to the empirical. He shows what kind of economic strategy can actually work for the American people. And I think a big mistake Republicans have made here is elevating President Clinton and putting him in their ads and talking about him so much, because it makes him a very important arbiter in this race. And I think we all know that if this race comes down to one vote and it's President Clinton's, who he's voting for.
Again, it's this retrospective cast of mind. Let's go back to the 1990s. If we can't go to the 30s or the 60s, the 90s. Bill Clinton had the exquisite good fortune to be the first post-Cold War president and to be president when the commercialization of the internet drove the NASDAQ in 5 years from 800 to 4,500. Now, if you think you can reproduce those conditions, good luck.
Well, two things I think are fascinating about the Bill Clinton thing. First of all, I remember in 2000, Al Gore could barely mention Bill Clinton's name, and he served with him on the ticket. And we've come a long way.
He did speak at the convention.
He did speak at the convention, but basically he wouldn't let him campaign for him. He wouldn't let him cut commercials. He wouldn't. And for a guy, President Obama, who beat his wife and now in the position of basically please save me in the course of this campaign, is a fascinating thing. The other fascinating thing is the last two-term Republican president was barely mentioned at the Republican convention. So the idea that you have this guy who the president has never had a relationship, who's going to be used to prop him up, is, I think, fascinating. I think they have to be really careful. Bill Clinton's a very popular figure. He's beloved by Democrats and independents like him. They think his time in office was very well. I think they got to be careful that basically people don't walk away from, well, we kind of like that president. Well, now we're stuck with this president, President Obama. They got to be careful that it is about the future and it is about President Obama. It's not about the great days in the past of Bill Clinton.
One thing, I don't want to correct all of the things you said about Bill Clinton, but Bill Clinton did campaign for us, and that's why we did so very well and we won the popular vote. He didn't campaign in all of the states that he wanted to campaign in, but he campaigned in sufficient number, and he did not beat his wife. They competed, and President Obama won the nomination. Those are the two.
So you did correct him on basically all of
those without facts.
Oh my God.
One thing I'm going to be watching for, Dr. Healey, is whether Bill Clinton, in that speech on Wednesday night, as Bill pointed out, Clinton does appear in the Romney welfare ads, whether or not Bill Clinton does bring up and take on this whole welfare argument, which a lot of Democrats have called race baiting.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting that the signature accomplishment of the Clinton administration, the welfare reforms that were bipartisan and embraced by many and rejected by Obama at the time, he thought that they were a bad idea, have become so central to this race. And what we've seen is that a unilateral action by the Obama administration saying, we don't feel that we need to enforce these anymore. We will release the states from enforcing the work requirement. And, you know, you can make the argument, and I'm sure some people are spoiling to do that, yes. You know, that isn't actually abandoning the core of the legislation, but it is. You never give government a power and say, oh, don't worry, we won't use it.
These are Republican governors asking for the waivers.
But this is something that we're not even sure that a president has the power to do under this legislation.
Yeah, I just have, everything you're saying, Lieutenant Governor, has been widely debunked. And I think there is a reason that Mitt Romney did not bring this up at his convention floor. If you don't have the guts to make an argument to the American people in the light of day, but you spend $10 million of it, making it the core of your campaign, it says something about the character of who you are, and it says something about the kind of campaign that you're running. If this $10 million is a lot of money, and if that's really the centerpiece of his argument to people in their living rooms late at night when they're watching TV, then why didn't he say anything about it at the convention?
I think one of the most important things you can do is actually go back and look at the documents here, because there's a lot of he said, she said going on about these welfare reforms. But the memo sent out said nothing about enforcing higher standards. That was something Catherine Sebelius went back later and said, oh, yes, oh, don't worry. We'll insist that they have better outcomes in the end. All the memo says is we have the power now to release states from enforcing these standards.
George, I think to me, the biggest problem with this argument, and it's like if you can so find a little tiny little kernel way down deep, it's like partially true, and we're going to make this argument. The truth has become a casualty in the course of this campaign on both sides of the aisle. The truth is a casualty in this. It's as if we're going to make any argument possible that's going to advantageous our side in order to overcome the other side. The Republicans do it, the Democrats do it.
Same scale?
I think that, not necessarily on the same scale, but we'll see at this convention, because I think, from my perspective, what happened at this convention is that nobody is calling on it, or maybe few people are calling on it. Paul Ryan, what he did in his speech, I think so stretched the truth. And I like Paul Ryan, have a lot of great respect for Paul Ryan, but the elements that he said about closing the GM plant, which closed before Barack Obama took president, about the Simpson-Bowles bill, which he opposed, and then all of a sudden he faults Barack Obama for. At some point, the truth should matter.
At every particular, and what he said about the GM plant was right. He did not say it closed before Obama became president. The one who said that was the so-called fact checker at the Washington Post who got it wrong. He said it was closed in December 2008. In fact, it was making trucks in April 2009.
George, the way when anybody that's watching that didn't know the facts of it, anybody watching that speech, whether they, as I say, just like the welfare thing, anybody coming away from that believes one thing. And you're saying the fact may be right, but he was trying to convey that Barack Obama was responsible for the closing of the GM plant, and that isn't true.
Yeah, he said, especially in Janesville, where we were about to lose a major factory, entirely true.
And the point is that Barack Obama had said specifically about that factory that, this kind of factory, with government intervention should be able to be open for another 100 years. And then when it was announced that it would eventually close, and it did close after Obama was in office, not before, no intervention occurred. Nothing was done. The point is just the whole idea is that this is precisely the type of thing that Obama said that he was going to be able to accomplish, and he has not.
But Paul Ryan supported the auto bailout.
But the point is, we're talking about fact-checking here, though, at the moment. I mean, this is one of those cases where the fact-checkers just had it wrong.
I think the disservice.
I disagree with the. Now the fact checkers are liars too. I mean, at some point.
Not liars, just don't have their facts right.
George, I mean, I can get into the weeds of all of that, and I have my paper too. No, please don't give me no more paper. My handbag is full. The point is that Paul Ryan, a rising star in the Republican Party, clearly. He exaggerated a lot of points. And we spent the next day trying to clear up all of the exaggeration. There's a large issue here, George, and that is the American people are tired, sick and tired of the politics. They're sick and tired of the back and forth, the acrimony, which is one of the reasons why I think President Obama, Vice President Biden, and Bill Clinton, who I believe is a key leader next week for us, they need to make sure they talk directly to the American people, encourage them to be partners in what we need to do together as a country, and not get into trying to refute all of the Republican arguments.
This isn't the weeds. This is, again, Mr. Kessler of the Washington Post. The plant was closed in December 2008 before Obama was sworn in. False. Now, a subtext of all this is that we're all racist. Can I ask you a question? What is the largest city in Illinois?
Chicago.
You're a racist.
No.
Now, the guys over at MSNBC have said that when the Republicans talk about Chicago, that's a subtext for racism.
George, let me just tell you, as the first African-American woman to manage a presidential campaign, I'll never forget the conversation I had with my dad. I thought he would be excited. I'm the first black woman. My dad said, Donna, it's just a job. Just a job. So, I mean, look, race has been a subtext, context of every campaign in modern history and past history. And so whether it's the usage of the word y'all to Chicago, I don't get drawn into those conversations. Or hearing about a camera woman at a network I also work for, getting pelted with peanuts
at the convention.
At the convention, I don't get drawn into that because I understand when you put this conversation on the table, we cannot have a substantive conversation about welfare reform, about social policy, because we want to get drawn into that conversation. Look, we need to have a forward-looking conversation about what it takes to grow our economy in the 21st century for all Americans.
To me, and we get to a better conversation on this. To me, is a difference between being the letter of the facts right and the spirit of the facts right, and both sides. And you could see it loud and clear at the Republican convention. The spirit of what they were saying was just not true. The spirit of what they were saying, you can go and find an element of it. But to me, I'm with Donna on this. The American public is tired of all this argument and this whole empty chair thing that we had with Clint Eastwood, which was obviously a bizarre moment and I think a misuse of resources by the Romney campaign and the most prime real estate you had. To me, the empty chair that matters in all of this, which neither side has talked to, is the empty chair of the man or the woman that didn't come home from Iraq, that people are sitting around the table because their husband or wife is gone or their daughter is gone. It's the empty chair of the woman that has to work 2 shifts because she doesn't able to have flex time, and who's going to provide that for her? It's the empty chair of the grandfather with Alzheimer's that can't be there because they're in a home because the family can't manage them and all that. That is what people want to talk about. In going 4 years, they don't want to talk about what happened 3 years ago. They don't want to talk about what happened 4 years ago. They want to know how that empty chair is going to be fixed and who's going to manage that.
He brings up the empty chair of the soldier doesn't come home from Afghanistan. Did it surprise you? We didn't hear more about the war.
It did, and here I'm in complete agreement with what David Plouffe said in your interview with him. 2,100 Americans have died in Afghanistan. 53 died in August. If the mission is not so important, that someone running for commander-in-chief won't mention an ongoing war, much the longest war in our national history. That, more than any other thing, makes the case as to why we should have been out 2 years ago and why we should be out now as fast as is logistically possible.
Governor Romney had just given a major speech the day before on this topic, and so I'm sure that he was trying to cover different territory there. He has discussed Afghanistan on many occasions and made it very clear that he finds it inappropriate and dangerous for our troops. The president gave a date certain for withdrawal. He's said that he is going to conduct a review of the conditions on the ground if he's elected as president and make sure that our interests in Afghanistan are preserved. And there's no conversation with the Democratic Party right now around what those interests are. Do they still care if Afghanistan becomes a haven for terrorism? Are they going to postpone their withdrawal if they feel that it's not appropriate at this time, if it's not safe for our nation to be withdrawing troops on this expedited level? It really seems as though this withdrawal level in Afghanistan has been set on a political time schedule.
What Mitt Romney said during the primary, and I quote, we should not negotiate with the Taliban, we should defeat the Taliban. If Mitt Romney's position is that we should fight on in Afghanistan until we defeat the Taliban, whatever that means, he will lose and he should lose.
You get the last word.
His position is that we should not be looking at Afghanistan through a political lens. And I can only say that when we look at this pre-announced withdrawal schedule, it can only be viewed as political.